Hi everybody, and welcome to Central Rocky Mountain Permaculture Institute's Permaculture Design course for 2023. My name is Michael Thompson. I'm Jerome's partner in ecosystems design and a board member of Crmpi. So I'm not going to be able to be there with you guys this coming week over in Paonia, but I will be meeting with you when you come up to Crmpi the following week, and I'll go over greenhouse design and climate batteries with you. In the meanwhile, I'm going to be on a bicycle tour, so I will be away while you're watching this video. In here, we're going to cover economic systems, how you can create your own economy, and home systems, all kinds of permaculture hacks and permaculture cycles that you can use at home. I'm going to go over these real briefly here. You can watch this video and then pick up the PDFs of those two classes, and they're both full of links that you can see online. I usually ask a lot of questions when I'm there with you, but since I won't be, I'd like to encourage you to discuss these things among yourselves and inspire each other with different examples of things that you do that are like these. So here we go. A couple of things I'd like to start with are what is an economy? Nature has many economies. We call them ecosystems, mediums of exchange between different biological organisms, from microbes all the way up to large animals and plants and trees. There's a lot of work to be discovered and looked into about these. One of them is Suzanne Simard's work on mycelia in the soil and how trees and roots and microbes all are integrated by the mycelia. About our money economy, as we all know, our currency is only a single currency. We have dollars here, euros, and we have pounds and all kinds of different currencies. Each nation has its own, as we know. But when the currency is devalued by inflation or by malfeasance among banks and crashes in the market, what do people do? Well, they can barter. They can create their own small economies, small-scale economies, or they can create their own currency. There's no law against that. You can look at Berkshires in Massachusetts. You can look at Ithaca Hours. Many others. There are hundreds of local currencies around the country. You may have them in your area. Most people don't take personal responsibility for a changing climate. They think that the solutions for this need to come from government and industry. And so people lay that responsibility at the feet of governments and industries, and they continue to become or to be part of the problem, driving large vehicles, going to the store for a single item, using a whole bunch of gas instead of using mass transit or a bicycle or some other means. And so that's something that we need to all encourage each other toward, is to take responsibility, personal responsibility for our effect on the climate, and to act accordingly to try and reduce that effect. There's one other thing that I've been remarking about in our economy. Remember Ronald Reagan and his trickle-down economy? That didn't work. A lot of people will tell you that. And the reason it didn't work is that he was using a metaphor. Trickle-down, meaning you give money or you give some sort of subsidy to the wealthier companies, individuals, families, etc., and that the funds that they make more of will trickle down and create jobs. That's not really true, because water, as we all know as gardeners, water does flow downhill, powered by gravity. You need to pump it to make it go uphill. In the economy, as money is used in the world, money tends to flow uphill in terms of, if you subsidize poorer people, they will spend that money quickly, and then that money will migrate uphill to the wealthier people, the wealthier corporations. And so the metaphor is false. and we need to recognize that. I'm going to go off now and show you all the files I have here that I'd like you to follow on to. So first I'd like to cover with you what is an economy. Of course, nature's economy is called ecosystems, and humans' economies are at various different scales: global, national, regional, local community, and family. And I'm going to just kind of try and demonstrate in here how you can focus on and create your own small-scale economy. In fact, you'll all find that that already exists in your lives, down to the basic element, family economy. Nature's economy is, of course, based on an exchange of energy elements, water, nutritious elements in the soil. There's fungus and mycelia that trade elements between the minerals and the roots, and basically help nature to be very, very robust. And nature doesn't use a universal currency as humans do, but their system operates very, very well and extensively. Here's an example of what economists and bankers, how they see the different elements of the economy that we all use. This one basically meaning that the bicycle is the slow death of the economy. I put that in there. I changed that word because it's a little more accurate. A cyclist is a disaster for the country's economy. He doesn't buy cars, he doesn't borrow money to buy them, he doesn't pay insurance, he doesn't buy fuel, he doesn't pay to have the car serviced, and no repairs are needed that he can't do himself on a bicycle. He doesn't use paid parking, doesn't cause major accidents, doesn't need multi-lane highways. He's not getting obese. Healthy people are not necessary or useful to the economy. They're not buying medicine, they don't go to hospitals or doctors. They add nothing to the country's GDP. So that's a kind of an interesting example of how the way that you behave in the economy is beneficial to you, but not so much to the money economy. All the exchange of currency is where the economists think that's how the economy runs, so it has to be done that way. And when we take a little revolutionary step by replacing our car travel miles with bicycle or skateboard or whatever, we are basically taking the benefits to ourselves and leaving the general, larger national economy out of it. Now, as we've said, human economic systems are based on universal currency, which actually allows or actually fosters wealth accumulation, as we all know. And here's an example of a gentleman lighting a cigar with a $100 bill. And his theory of how to become wealthy is to buy low and sell high. And here you see a worker, an agricultural worker, and we're going to call her low because her services are what the money managers are buying low and selling high. There are many other examples of currencies, if you will. There's Bitcoin. There's a lot of different currencies around the world, but they all operate in basically the same way, and they're all susceptible to crashes and inflation and all kinds of other problems. On the other hand, on the upper right-hand corner of this page, we see a little link to the indigenous potlatch ceremony of the Northwest Native people. And they would have these meetings once or twice a year, and it was a way to demonstrate power and honor by giving away wealth or precious things. And we could use a little more of that in our communities today. There's a link down here in the lower right-hand corner to Robin Wall Kimmerer's essay called The Serviceberry, which really is a great example. I encourage everyone to go read that. Here's some social and environmental consequences of currency wealth and the market economy. You can read this, but essentially my big example here is down at the bottom, where these are news reports in different years describing how the Central Valley of California, by long-term drought and farmers pumping water out of the ground through wells to water their crops of tomatoes and vegetables and fruits so that they can ship them away to other parts of the country and the world, and in exchange for money, which they then use to pay off the debt for the farm and their costs of maintenance, etc. But what's happened as a result is for all these decades of pumping water out of the ground, they've depleted the water table, and the ground has actually sunk by close to 20 feet by now, is the latest I've heard. And they measure this by, the relationship dimensionally between the valley and the mountains around it, and that's how they know that the ground has sunk. It's caused a lot of damage on bridges and things like that, but that's something that I've always found fascinating. Because they're basically, in order to stick with the market economy, they're kind of destroying the environment there. They've gotten a lot of good snow this winter, but it takes many, many years, perhaps hundreds of years, to recharge the groundwater. Discuss local gift and barter economy examples. We're back to Grandma survived the Great Depression because her supply chain was local and she knew how to do stuff. Here I'm giving you some examples of local currencies: the Ithaca Hours, the Berkshires in California, and another example here is the slow money investment clubs. Woody Tash wrote this book way back in around 2000, 99 or 2000, and it really took hold. We've now got dozens and dozens of investment clubs around the country. Several of them are nonprofit clubs. The first of those was an investment club in Aspen in the Roaring Fork Valley here, and we collect donations from everybody, anyone who wants to give, and there are some people who give a lot, and they get a tax deduction for that because it's a nonprofit. And then the club, which we call the Two Forks Club, turns around and twice a year makes zero interest loans to farmers and food producers in our food shed. Very valuable idea that really lifts up producers and gives them an advantage in the marketplace. There's also seed saving, start your own local seed library, and on the right-hand side here is what I call the gift economy vouchers. I can print these and put a little stamp on them so I know they're authentic, and I can give them to friends and say, there's a date on here. That's when I'll have that bread or that beer, and then they can trade that with other people for other things, and eventually, when it comes back to me, I produce the goods. And be careful of this one in the lower right-hand corner. If you advertise your bartering, you may need to fill out a barter form for the IRS. So I prefer the gift economy for that reason. Sharing economy, that's another way to avoid use of money. There's, of course, Napster, which was my original introduction to the sharing economy. That had some problems with it, among which was that the artists who created the music didn't get paid for it when people were sharing it. But it did lead to a lot of other sharing elements, like Lyft, like cars and Uber and Airbnb, hotel rooms or houses you can rent, apartments you can rent. And car sharing is the thing. I think it's Turo that where you can rent out your car. There's also car services that you can use that some cities have. Spinlister, in the lower left-hand corner there, is a website that I have found and used for renting people's sports equipment, bicycles primarily, in places I travel to, so I don't have to ship my bicycle. There's also in many public libraries around the country, you can use your library card to access this website called Crmpi in the lower right-hand corner, crmpi.com. And there you can have free streaming of many, many different movies and series and things like that that the libraries subscribe to. Food sovereignty is something that we found an example of back in 2011 in the town of Sedgwick, Maine. And what they've done is they began, people in the town who were producing food elements, primarily one guy who was selling raw milk to his neighbors, and he was bragging about it on Instagram and got caught by the government and the Department of Agriculture, which took him to task, sued him, and extracted a fair amount of money from him as a penalty because it was against the law. But the actual example of that caused the state legislature, several people in there, said, we gotta fix this. We have to allow people to be able to do this. So they actually created a law allowing people in Maine to produce food and sell it to their neighbors with some limitations. And that has taken hold there, and it's brought about a lot of other examples around the country where people are legislating locally to allow their community members to produce and sell. We have in the state of Colorado, we have something called the Cottage Food Act, which allows someone with a regular residential kitchen to create certain kinds of food that they can sell at farmers markets or in the open market. And here on the right is an excerpt from the Serviceberry, Robin Wall Kimmerer. It's amazing, this little story of an anthropologist who was in the Amazon and met a tribe of natives there, and he saw that one hunter had brought home a sizable kill, far too much to be eaten by his family alone. So the researcher asked how he would store the excess, smoking or drying, things like that. The hunter was puzzled by the question. Why would he store the meat? Instead, he sent out an invitation to a feast, and soon the neighboring families were gathered around his fire until every last morsel was consumed. This seemed like maladaptive behavior to the anthropologist, who asked again, given the uncertainty of meat in the forest, why didn't he store the meat for himself, which is what the economic system of his home culture would predict. Store my meat? I store my meat in the belly of my brother, replied the hunter. How has the COVID-19 pandemic affected work? How will it be different in the future? There's a lot of discussion that's gone on about this. There have been, of course, many businesses had their employees work from home, and some continue to do that even after the pandemic. There's a lot of people who decided during the pandemic that their jobs were just not very unfulfilling, and they left and started little businesses. So this is something that's been happening and is going to increase as time goes on. And the economy is going to change and evolve as a result. What's a natural economy? Discuss history and examples of this. Wikipedia describes the natural economy as a type of economy in which money is not used in the transfer of resources among people. It is a system of allocating resources through direct bartering, entitlement by law, or sharing out according to traditional custom. There's 8 forms of capital that we can consider, and only one of them is really financial. And there's experiential capital, intellectual capital, spiritual capital, social capital, cultural capital, living capital, and material capital. And those are the 7 others aside from money. And finally, in this little economics class, I've put in a lot of links here. You'll have to open the PDF that Corrine will give you, and just click on these links. There's amazing stuff in here, very inspirational. And I just want to say thank you very much for your attention on this one, and I hope you all have some lively discussions over dinner about the possibilities of creating your own economy at any scale. Thanks very much. All right, here's my other course that you're going to observe through this video and through the PDF, called Home Systems, Permaculture Cycles for Self-Reliance and Community. Simple backyard and home kitchen stuff anyone can do. I think you're all going to have a lot of fun with this, because I bet that all of you are already doing a lot of things like this, many of which are not in here. I got a whole bunch myself that I'll show you, but I'd love for you to all discuss among yourselves and compare notes on the permaculture hacks and all the different things that you do at home to get off of the global economy and be more self-reliant. This picture I saw it on the internet years ago and pulled it up. This lady looks just like my farm grandma from Ohio. And Grandma survived the Great Depression because her supply chain was local and she knew how to do stuff. As we know, in the Great Depression, money was quite rare, and people had to rely on their own skills in order to survive. So here's some of my examples. So I have a jar in my kitchen, and I put compost in there. I put food waste, vegetable food waste, only no meat. But, here's a jar of jam that got lost in the refrigerator and grew a little mold. And here's a ginger and lemon tea that I make in a French press. Well, all this goes in that jar. Then it gets layered outside on the ground with straw. So kitchen waste and then straw. And in my neighborhood, we have bears that come down and wander around our yards and get in my fruit trees. And so when they invade my compost pile, I go find some bear shit in the neighborhood, and I bring it home and I smear it all over the top of my straw after I've fed the compost. Put the mesh and the rocks back, put a little human urine around the edge to keep the raccoons and the dogs away. And the bear poop, when I water it in, it works amazingly well. The bear will come by and sniff it and just walk away. Backyard compost in this lasagna layering method, as Jerome described to me, is amazing. It's slow. It takes about 6 months to completely compost, and it doesn't really burn off weed seeds or other seeds, but you just be careful what you're putting in it. So 6 months after I've done all this, I've quit feeding. This is my summer pile, by the way. And so I let this stew all winter long. In the winter, I have a different pile, and I just put it there regardless of the snow. It freezes. I do the same thing. Waste, straw, human urine. I don't have to worry about the bear poop in the winter. Obviously, the bears are sleeping. And so that becomes easier. Not much compost during the winter, but in about April or May, I take the summer compost from last year, and I take it in sections and I liquefy it. I add a whole lot of water to it in a trash can. The worms and the straw float to the top. I take my pitchfork and pull all that out, put it right back on where the compost pile is to feed with future food waste, and the worms are already in there, so they're ready to go. Once I've taken all that out, I get this brown worm casting tea, I call it. Spread that all over the garden. There's sludge at the bottom. Sometimes I just spread that sludge on a bare spot in my garden, and all kinds of stuff that I ate last year will sprout. Melons and all kinds of things that I put seeds in the compost jar. Tomatoes, melons, cucumbers, all kinds of stuff just naturally pops up. And then from the bear poop that I put on the compost during the summer, last year, uh, all kinds of food comes up right in through the compost. So I harvest those and spread them around through the garden. This year I got 40 apricot trees from the apricot pits that came out the back end of the bear. And I potted those up, and I'm giving them to Vanessa Harmony, who will raise them up and graft them and sell them. There's other inhabitants in my garden. I bet there's a lot in yours as well. And we not only have the worms, but I have Roscoe the squirrel, who I left a pumpkin that was kind of getting moldy outside, and he ate the whole damn thing. In the next page, I'll show you what ended up happening with that. The Rocky Mountain gopher snake, it's about 3 feet, maybe 3.5 feet long. I scared the crap out of my neighbor, and she came over and said, come look at this snake. What is this? I said, oh, that snake eats chipmunks. We need to leave that snake alone. Please don't kill it. And so that snake is still wandering around our neighborhood, keeping the chipmunks under control. I have avian inhabitants. Many, many birds make nests in the fruit trees around my yard simply because there's lots of these worms in my compost pile, and they can just go in and peck around the edge and pull all kinds of food out. We have pollinators, and we have predators, and we have the compost bear poop to start new trees. Here's Roscoe. He ate the whole pumpkin, but when he was about halfway done, I harvested the seeds, planted them in the garden, and I got more pumpkins out of them. And meanwhile, he ate the rest of it. It took him about 3 weeks. We have all kinds of seeds. I make these origami seed packets and put all my excess seed in there and give that to the library. In the Basalt Regional Library, we have a seed library there. It's pretty cool. It's all local gardeners and some seeds from seed companies that are expired or last year's seed. So if you have a library willing to do this, go for it. It's awesome. You can get well acclimated seed for all kinds of vegetables that will resist insect infestations, and because gardeners have collected seed and replanted plants, they evolve quickly over not very many years to accommodate your climate, your temperatures, your humidity levels, water levels, your soil, and of course insects. Here's a bok choy reboot. You may have tried this. I harvested the bok choy, and then I took the root part, the base of it, and I put it in water and got some roots to grow out of it, stuck it back in the garden, went again. Many of you may have heard of this new kind of way of looking at waste. Pre-cycling, the practice of reducing waste by avoiding items which will bring waste into the home or business. Stores that allow you to bring your own vessels, fill them up from larger containers in the store, and forget the packaging, forget the recycling. This is the future. And I hope that more and more of these will be popping up. What are some of the food products that you guys make from available sources to replace products you would otherwise buy? Some of my examples are, of course, my apple tree, Mo, which makes beautiful large Macintosh apples. Here's what I do when I take those apples and peel them and then chop them up and make them into pie filling. By the way, that's pretty easy. I put them all in a big bowl, and I calculate by weight how many pies that's going to make, put in some cinnamon, some brown sugar, some cornstarch, mix it all up, and then put it in Ziploc bags, flatten them out, put them in the freezer. I have probably 24 different kinds of pie fillings in the freezer down there, and so I can make a pie anytime I want to, pretty easily. The peels, I then put them on parchment paper after putting them in a bowl and mixing them with some melted butter, some sugar, and some cinnamon, tiny bit of salt. And then I roll them all around in that, put them on the parchment paper, and dry them on about 200 or 180 degrees in the oven. And they're crispy, crunchy, delicious chips. that everybody loves. They disappear pretty fast. I have a cider press that I bought many years ago, probably 30 years ago, and I've rebuilt almost everything on this except for the metal parts and the basket, the tray, some of the legs on the, I put new wheels on. This thing has gotten a lot of use, and so making cider, I make a fermented cider, a hard cider. Get up to about 11% when I ferment it and bottle it. And sometimes my favorite apples to use are apples that have frozen on the tree, frozen and thawed a few times. I go get them when they're frozen early in the morning. I lay them on a tarp in my yard, let them thaw out a little. And then I don't even need to use the crusher. Just throw them in the basket and press them, and I get the sweetest cider of the year from these apples. You have to be very careful. If you let them go too long, you'll get a kind of an off flavor from the fermentation that's going on inside the apple. Another thing I discovered is that maple syrup has to be boiled down from 40 parts to 1 part to make syrup. I experimented with apple cider, boiling it down until I had the consistency just about the same as maple syrup. And it was about 6 or 7 to 1. So it uses a lot less energy. And I can then store this in jars indefinitely and open a jar, pull out a tablespoon of it, mix it with water, hot water, make hot cider, use it as sweetener for all kinds of things. And it's natural and it comes from my trees. Another one is all these different combos, my garlic scapes that I harvest and add my Italian rocket arugula to it, mix it all up, add some cheese and some nuts, put them in cupcake tins and freeze them and then put them in a bag. So each one of these is one person's meal. Just boil up some noodles and thaw these out. Off you go. Whenever I make meat dishes, I usually, it's just my wife and I, so we don't eat a lot of meat, but when we have leftover meat, I mix it with all kinds of vegetables and turn it into empanadas or meat pies, freeze them, and then they pull them out whenever we want them. Oh, here's another one. When the citrus is at its peak during the winter in the store, I buy organic citrus, and before I use it, I pull the zest off and dry it out and put it in jars, and then I can add it to recipes all year round. So what do you do with a big fruit harvest? You jam it in cannon. This is my method of making sorbet. You guys might really like this. Everybody in my family and all my friends who come to dinner, they just love this. Take any kind of fruit that you harvest in season, cut it up small, freeze it. Then when you're ready, grab it out, put it in a food processor, grab some maple syrup, run it until everything is like crumbs, and then you run it while you're drizzling very slowly maple syrup in. You end up with, this is like about a quart of fruit, and I end up using about 1/3 of a cup of maple syrup until it turns creamy like this. Once it's creamy like this, of course, the friction of the blade has melted it somewhat. So I scoop it out into a jar, put it back in the freezer, and a day later, it's sorbet. It comes out like sorbet, it spoons easily, and it's absolutely delicious. No preservatives, local fruit. Have fun. And what other benefits do you derive from pruning your fruit trees? Well, the way I do this is I prune my apricot tree every winter. Take the branch ends that have a lot of fruit buds on them, stick them in water in the house, and I get winter blossoms all winter long. If you have really good, healthy trees, you can get lots of good, happy, beneficial insects. And when you're pruning the tree, you can do all of this fruit wood. How do you ferment foods and beverages, and how do you use microbial livestock? Here's my 10-gallon gravity-fed homebrewing system. Here's the 15-gallon pot, 10-gallon coolers, and all works in gravity to bring the benefits of the grain into the beer. Put some yeast in, carboys, and off it goes. We do kimchi, we do sauerkraut, we do bottles for barter or parties. We have sourdough, and of course we make bread. All these things are great, inspiring things for everyone to do. And what are your food storage methods? When food is on sale, you can buy it if you have a place to store it, either freezers or shelves, or as I do in plastic buckets, trash cans with tight-fitting lids, storing bags of bulk grains and beans. And then, of course, there's homebrew. These are 2-gallon kegs in my beer refrigerator. There's a CO2 tank. So some of my beer goes into kegs. Sometimes I gift those out to hunters who give me meat in exchange. But most of it is just for self consumption and parties at my house. And then I bottle and keep the bottles in here. And those are really good for gifting. Oh, and here's one you might like a lot. If you're a bicycle rider, and a corn eater, I take this method, put leftover wax from candles into an old crock pot, melt it, take my bicycle chain off, put it in there when it's all melted and hot, leave it in for about 20 minutes or so. That liquid wax gets into every joint of the chain. Pull the chain out, let it drip dry, and then shake out the joints so it's flexible again, and then put it back on the bike. I get about 300 miles with no noise from the chain. And the wax, instead of oil, has another benefit, which is that if you use oil on your chains and you ride in the winter or in sandy terrain, a lot of that dust gets kicked up onto your chain, and it actually collects there because it sticks to the oil. And with that, all that the sand and other gritty stuff on your chain, the chain wears out pretty quickly. Most of my friends who oil their chains have to buy a new chain every 2 years. By waxing them, you don't get any dirt attraction to the chain. It's a very smooth ride, and it lasts for 300 miles or so, and the chain itself will last easily 5 years without replacement. And then, because the chain doesn't use much wax, I use dried up corn cobs, soak them in the wax. They come out like this, and those are great fire starters. I can light one of these up and start a charcoal fire with it, or take it camping with me and use it to start a campfire. Here's another one. When you're trimming trees or cutting bigger wood, this is a hand chainsaw. No fuel required except for the oatmeal you ate this morning. And you can wax this chain also, the same effect. It will make it easy to cut, and it will help to avoid pinching. It doesn't affect its cutting ability at all. And finally, I call this the art of the gift. We talked about a seed sharing library. Here's a friend of mine who distills whiskey, and I trade with him for sometimes for that. The beer, the kegs, the bottles, the bread, the homebrew, and occasionally if you grow cannabis and you are in a cannabis legal state, that's a good barter item. And here's a link to a group in Denver, in the Front Range between Denver and Boulder, called Mile High Swappers. And they'll announce a swap meet on their Facebook page, and people will show up from all over the place, and they'll bring all kinds of things that they made. And it's very inspiring. It encourages everyone to do what's necessary for the future. That is, to become less of a consumer and more of a producer. I hope everyone's been inspired by this, and I'll be talking with you all at Crmpi next week to talk about greenhouses and climate battery design and overall climate design for a greenhouse. Thanks much.